Come on up front where you can see the slides, if you will. If you can read small print from back there, God bless you. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Can I have everybody's attention for a minute? This is a really important message. Congratulations to Tony, because tomorrow is his last real day of work. That implies that he's had a few over the years. But no, tomorrow's his last day, and Friday he's officially retired, so congratulations. And I have some announcements here, and then Tony's going to say a prayer for us. On the prayer list, continue to pray for those on our list, the bulletin, April's list, and Slack. Aiken Elementary Backpass Ministry, this week's food item is individual serving size meats. Please be sure that they're in cans, pop tops and stuff, because the folks that are receiving these don't necessarily have access to a can opener. Pizza Pie and Tie-Dye is this Saturday, April 20th, 11 to 1. Sign up tonight so they know how much pizza to get. Remember to bring something to dye. Everything else will be provided. The family breakfast is this Sunday morning before class, and we're going to be serving from 8:15 to 9:15. Please sign up out there so we know how many mouths we need to feed and how much food to get. Spend a little time with the family before classes and get fed too. A week from Saturday, the 27th, is a day of encouragement at 10 a.m. See Connie Waiswillows for more information. VBS. As we plan for Vacation Bible School, there's a couple of class teacher helpers that we still need. Please see Erica or Mark Goldie to let them know you can help with these. Teacher for 1st to 3rd grades, helper for 1st to 3rd grade, helper for 4th to 6th grade. And VBS will be on Saturday, June 23rd. More details coming soon. What's that? 22nd. Saturday the 22nd. I'm sorry, I got my birthday locked in on the 23rd there. Spring Ladies Day, Steel Magnolias, is Saturday, May 18th at 8:45 to noon. The sign-up list is out on the table. Take some time, the flyers, and invite your friends. See Michelle King with any questions. Okay, Tony, would you offer a prayer to kind of kick us off here? Thank you, Tony. Okay, So tonight is the last of a mini-series of 4 classes, and there are some copies of the handouts from the previous classes out on the kiosk in the foyer if you missed out on one of those, and the videos of those are actually on the website too. If you want to go back and look at them, you can go through that. And tonight is Science in the Bible. And intricate, complex, and elegant systems are all around us that defy probability and logic, and they establish and exhibit an amazing sophistication even in the face of a natural tendency toward disorder and decay. If you remember the previous apologetics classes that I've had, some of that is in there. The Bible told us of many natural workings long before we understood them. And I use the term science in the Bible, but you got to know that science is the study of things. So I want you to think in terms of this being technical stuff that's described in the Bible long before anyone knew what it was. So that's what we're covering tonight, okay? And I thought this was a pretty good introduction. It says in 1 Timothy 6, verses 20 and 21, Timothy, guard what has been entrusted to your care. Turn away from godless chatter and the opposing ideas of what is falsely called knowledge, which some have professed, and in so doing have departed from the faith. So I'm going to bounce through a bunch of topics tonight and kind of expound on them and what they are. And the Bible describes them what sounds to be pretty simple, but I'm going to kind of describe how we've come to understand really what they meant. And the first one is circumcision, an aspect of it. And in Philippians 3, verses 4 to 6, if someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. Circumcised on the 8th day, remember that part, of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church, as for righteousness based on the law and fruitlessness. Another place the 8 days is mentioned is in Luke chapter 1, 59-60. On the 8th day they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him after his father Zechariah. But his mother spoke up and said, no, he is to be called John. And what you got to know is medical science only recently has figured out that blood clotting in a newborn actually peaks on the 8th day of their life, which if you think about it, it's saying that that's the best time to circumcise them, right? So the Bible is describing this thing that this is how you should do it. And lo and behold, 2,000 years later, we come to understand that that's the natural progression of an infant, and it's the best time to do it. Imagine that. Next thing is electromagnetic waves, and electromagnetic wave is exactly how it sounds. It's the combination of electrical and magnetic pulses coming out. Radio waves are that, microwaves are that. There's a lot of different things that are electromagnetic waves. In Job chapter 35, verse 38, do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you, here we are? Implying that the waves can talk. And lo and behold, we now know that radio waves travel at the speed of light. This is why you can have instantaneous wireless communication with someone on the other side of the planet. Science didn't discover this until about 160 years ago, when James Clerk Maxwell suggested that electricity and light waves were 2 forms of the same thing. And anyone who studied electricity is familiar with the Maxwell equations. It's all the math related to electromagnetics. And I had 2 classes in college on that stuff, and I think I can probably still recite about half of it because it's branded in your brain. They're the kind of the elementary basics for electromagnetics. Okay, like I said, I'm going to be jumping through these topics pretty quickly. Please feel free to stop me anywhere along the way, okay? Next topic is wind currents. And Ecclesiastes actually gets in, the wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. Implies that there's a lot of shifting and maneuvering around of the winds. And Solomon described the cycle of air currents 2,000 years before scientists discovered them. Another little topic is air has weight. Job 28, verse 25. To establish a weight for the wind and a portion the waters by measure. You think of weight of the wind. If you're walking around, do you think of the weight or wind having any weight? I like this fellow's name. Evangelista Torricelli conducted experiments with mercury that allowed him to measure the presence of air. He'd dip a glass tube, think of it as a long glass tube with a sealed end on it, into a bowl of mercury and raise the closed end of it, keeping the open end submerged. The weight of the mercury would pull it down, leaving a partial vacuum on the far end. This validated his belief that air and gas has mass, creating pressure on things around it. And one of the quotes of Torricelli is, "We live submerged at the bottom of an ocean of the elemental air, which by unquestioned experiments is known to have weight." And his whole experimentation is the first documented pressure gauge to actually measure that. And you can translate that all into weight. And this is a fun one. I'm actually going to stretch this out to a couple of different things. A role of blood. And you can find a couple places in the Bible where it talks about blood. Leviticus 17 is probably the first one there. "I'll set my face against any Israelite or any foreigner." My print's really small here, bear with me. "Among them who eats blood, and I will cut them off from the people. For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I've given it to you to make atonement for yourselves in the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life. Therefore I say to the Israelites, none of you may eat blood, nor may any foreigner residing among you eat blood. Any Israelite or my foreigner residing among you who hunts my animal or bird that may be eaten may drain the blood and cover it with earth, because the life of every creature is its blood. That's why I have said to the Israelites, you must not eat the blood of any creature, because the life of every creature is in the blood. Anyone who eats it must be cut off." They say, how many times can you say that? Life is in the blood. Bear with me. This is saying that life is in the blood. I'm focusing on that, okay? And this is the. He's describing that's how. Bear with me. I'm going to walk through some of this here, okay? In Deuteronomy, it says, "Only be sure that you do not eat the blood, for the blood is in life, and you shall not eat life with the flesh." This is not talking about cooked meat, okay? The interesting part about this, if you really look at fetal development, and this is fun because we just had a grandbaby, every fetus is genetically unique, and the heartbeat actually begins as early as 3 to 4 weeks. I'm going to show you a graph of that in a minute. In fertilization of birth, the heartbeat beats 54 million times. That's in the womb, okay? Brain waves are detectable at 6 weeks. All body systems are present at 8 weeks. And this is a picture of an embryo at about 18 days, or 2.5 weeks, okay? And if you notice in the upper right parts of that, it is showing the blood vessels already forming. And one of the interesting things we had with our first child is she tried to come early, and they ended up giving her steroids to help grow her lungs. And if you think about the sequence of events, God's wisdom in the design of the embryo is amazing, because one of the first things to start up is the circulatory system and the heart, because that's needed. And one of the last things to be developed are the lungs, because they're not needed till the birth. And if you look at this, this is a graph of the heart rate of a whole bunch of statistics and kids and stuff like that. And you can see that they start somewhere in the 4 to 6 week range. Some fetuses have a heartbeat, and this is independent and separate from the mom. It's a separate heart, separate heartbeat, separate circulatory system. And you can see that it continues on there. And one of the most amazing things to me is the baby. You talk about life is in the blood. The baby in the womb is connected to the mother's circulatory system through an interface where it can exchange nutrients and oxygen, but they're two separate systems. The baby and the mother have separate blood types in some cases, but they exchange the nutrients and oxygen. As soon as the baby is born, the heart functions completely differently. It changes instantaneously to be in a link to the mother, to be in a link to its own lungs to get oxygen. And the plumbing, direction, and flow changes almost instantaneously. So the blood system there, if you think about it, it is essential to life. Life is in that blood. Pretty amazing stuff. So the biological truth concerning the importance of the blood in our body's mechanism have been fully understood only in recent years. Up to about 120 years ago, sick people were told to bleed. I don't know if you've read some of the things about trying to cure people 200 years ago. They had bloodlettings. They say, oh, they have too much blood. We need to let some blood out of them and help heal them. But that's not true, is it? And if you lose your blood, you'll lose your life. And Leviticus and Deuteronomy, as I showed you, said that blood is the source of life. And that was 3,000 years ago that was written. So how did God describe this to you and help you understand it, where now we're just coming behind that and understand it? Okay, next item, human waste management. Bet you didn't know that was deep in the Bible, did you? In Deuteronomy 23, 12, and 13, designate a place outside the camp where you can go and relieve yourself. As part of your equipment, have something to dig with, and when you relieve yourself, dig a hole and cover up your excrement. Why would it do that? Why would it describe that way? In human waste management, today we know that human excrement carries bacteria like E. coli that can sicken and kill people. If they come into physical contact with it, especially if it makes its way into the streams and ponds that people drink from, thus today we have waste management systems. But over 3,000 years ago, when about 2 million Israelites had just left Egypt and traveling through the desert, God gave them specific directions of what to do to keep everyone healthy. How about that? Okay, here's another kind of fun one. Talk about genetics. The details of the genetics are not necessarily described, but the ramifications of it are. In Genesis 30, let me pass through all of your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones, and among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and there shall be my wages. So the righteous will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen, if it is with me. And Laban said, oh, that it were according to your word. So he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, and the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and gave them into the hand of the sons. Then he put 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of the lamb flocks. Okay. If you think about that, that's an interesting description of how to divide up sheep based on speckled and all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, what they're doing there is they're separating the sheep and the goats into groups with the same genetic traits. And they created isolated groups to where it was easy to see who owned each of them. And if there was any kind of change in that, it was readily discernible by looking at the sheep. They picked out what is a genetic trait, and from a distance you could tell who the sheep belonged to. It's a clear understanding of the recessive and dominant genetic traits and the passing on of these traits from generation to generation. It's described in the Bible, and it's accurate. Okay? Germs and maintaining health. I'm not going to go all through it. The whole chapter of Leviticus 15 goes into all sorts of men and women with discharges and things, and it describes it in a lot of detail. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, starting in about 1845, a doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis, say that 5 times fast, was horrified at the terrible death rate of women who gave birth in hospitals. As many as 30% died after giving birth. Semmelweis noted that doctors would examine the bodies of patients who died, then without washing their hands, go straight to the next ward and examine expectant mothers. This was their normal practice because the presence of microscopic diseases was unknown. And Semmelweis insisted that doctors wash their hands before examination, and the death rate immediately dropped to 2%. So you look at the specific instruction God gave his people for when they encounter disease, and when he that has an issue is cleansed of his issue, then excuse me? Okay. And when he has an issue, is cleansed of an issue, and then he shall number to himself even days for his cleansing, and wash his clothes, and bathe his flesh in running water. The word running is in there. And shall be clean. Leviticus 15:13. Till recent years, doctors washed their hands in a bowl of water, leaving invisible germs in their hands. However, the Bible says specifically to wash hands under running water, to carry them away. Another thing is the water cycle, if you're familiar with weather. In Ecclesiastes 11:3, if clouds are full of water, they pour rain on the earth. In Psalm 135, 6 and 7, the Lord does whatever pleases him. In the heaven and on the earth, in the seas and all their depth, he makes clouds rise from the ends of the earth. He sends lightning with the rain and brings out the wind from his storehouses. Now think about that. If you're reading that, and you live in Israel, or you live in Egypt and so forth, what is your understanding of why these things are stirring up and where they're coming from? It's pretty parochial, it's pretty local, right? In Amos, he builds his lofty palace in the heavens and sets the foundations on the earth. He calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out over the face of the land. The Lord is his name. And really what all these things are describing is the water cycle. And if you look at that, it's evaporation from the ocean that comes up and it cools and it drops water down. And then the water comes in a lot of different ways and gets back to the ocean. It may go underground, it may go through rivers and creeks, but that's fundamentally the water cycle. The amount of water doesn't change, it just changes where it is and what form it's in. It goes from a liquid form, it evaporates to a gaseous form, it comes over and goes to snow or rain and drops on the land, and then comes down through streams and rivers and gets back to the ocean. And you can see that there's a lot of different ways for the water to get there. And Ecclesiastes has an interesting phrase in it too. It says, all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. If you think about it, if you look at all these rivers with water going into the ocean and seas, you would think it's filling up, right? And to the place from which the rivers come. Then they return again. The Mississippi River dumps about 6 million gallons of water per second into the Gulf of Mexico, yet it doesn't fill up. When's the last time you saw the Gulf of Mexico rise because the Mississippi River is dumping into it? You don't, right? And the idea of a complete water cycle was not developed until the 16th and 17th centuries. And it was first proposed by Mr. Perot and Marionette in the 1600s. So how could the writers in the Bible know 2,000 years prior to this work? Unless it was inspired, right? Ocean currents. Psalm 858, verse 5 and 8. For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with the glory and honor. You have made him to have dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, even the beasts of the field, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea that pass through the paths of the sea. Why would they use the word paths of the sea? I'm going to show you a couple things here that cause water to move. The first one, there's a Coriolis effect, which is the spin. If you look at a tornado or a hurricane in the northern hemisphere, they spin one way, and in the southern hemisphere, they spin another. And you've probably noticed that in your receptacles at your house. If you've been to Australia, you know they spin the other direction. So basically, the toilets and tornadoes tend to revolve counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. And this, and I mention that because those are above the ground, and this is the oceans, they tend to spin in the opposite directions. Kind of crazy. But you can see, if you're familiar with things like the Japan Current, which goes from Japan up past the Aleutian Islands and in Alaska and down the west coast, it's what keeps the weather in Seattle nice and temperate. The Gulf Stream, which comes up along the coast of the United States, goes up past Iceland and down into, past the British Isles. It's what keeps the British islands a little more temperate. And that's because of all the water spinning there. And there's an interesting compression that happens too, because the Earth's rotation causes some additional complications in how all this works. But there's ramifications to some of this. These are examples of the currents that happen on the surface of the water and underneath the water. So these are the paths of the sea that's described in there. You said that tornadoes and the hurricanes, which are above the surface, rotate counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere, but when you get to the surface of the water, it rotates clockwise. I don't understand the details of it, but yes, they're actually in opposite directions. Wow. Okay. And so this is a Japan Current here, and you can see some of the different things. And I don't know if you've heard of the Great Garbage Patch. There's like many square miles of garbage and plastic bottles and stuff that are floating all together in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And it's basically because of this effect. It causes it to circle and go there. And the results of this interaction, it creates complex weather, it cleans the air, it cleans the water, it creates farmable fields, really, and fishable streams, and widely diverse and dispersed food, both in the oceans and in the land, all these things. And changing views, colors, and experiences and stuff. So it's pretty amazing, and the Bible describes it, and nothing that's described in the Bible related to that has ever been proven incorrect. Ocean springs. I found this one pretty interesting. In Job 38:16, it says, have you entered the springs of the sea and walked in the depth of the ocean? So you think in terms of springs. Researchers discovered the springs in the Pacific Ocean near the Galapagos in 1977 using Alvin, which is one of the deep sea submersibles. They were about a mile under the surface, so call it 5,280 feet. And since then, scientists have found other springs in the Pacific Ocean that appeared to be intrinsic element of the deep sea ecosystem and food chain. Scientists only found these springs about 45 years ago, but yet they're described in the Bible. And I'm going to kind of put this in perspective. If the spring is coming out of the undersea at a mile down, if you do the math on it, for every 33 feet of depth of the ocean, you get another atmosphere of pressure. Right now, you're breathing air at 14.7 psi, and you're surrounded by that pressure, so you don't notice it. But every 33 feet you go down, it's another 14.7. So every 100 feet is another 3 atmospheres. A mile down, it translates to be about 2,400 psi, or pounds per square inch, which is a lot of force. And to put it in perspective, and that is the spring coming up out of the ground underneath the ocean, pushing up against that. And it's coming up and out. To put it in perspective, who's familiar with the Bellagio fountains? You've seen them, they go up 150, 200 feet now. It's pretty impressive. Yes, in Las Vegas. The pressure behind those fountains to shoot them up 150, 200 feet is about 500 psi, or about a fifth of that. So that's how much pressure is being generated in those springs coming up out. It's a lot in order for it to come up out, right?
Water is not compressible.
Yep. Okay, so those springs are kind of interesting. Marine engineering. This is Noah's Ark. Genesis 6. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood and make room in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. This is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, having below the roof an opening 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark. Make lower, middle, and upper decks. And if you do the math on the geometry, it's a ratio of 30 to 5 to 3, which is the length to the width to the height. And so it puts it at about 450 feet long, and it was the largest seagoing vessel ever recorded prior to 1858. And lo and behold, if you've been to the Ark Encounter, you've probably seen this thing, and it's actually slightly bigger than the 450 feet. It's massive. You can see the people underneath it there. That puts it in the geometry in perspective. So if you pull the string on that, and you say, okay, modern shipbuilding. There was a boat built in 1844 called the Great Britain, and the dimensions were almost exactly the same of 30 to 5 to 3. These dimensions have proven to be near the perfect ratio for a seaworthy vessel. Shipbuilders during the Second World War used these dimensions to build ships. So how did Noah know the perfect dimensions of a large seagoing vessel? He was told, okay? And so you pull it. This is actually from a website called vesselfinder.com. I ended up pulling the data on 4 different ships at random. And you see the type of ship there is a row-row. Who knows what a row-row is? Roll on, roll off. It's the car carrier boats, okay? And some of these car carrier boats can hold up to 10,000 cars. They pick them up like in Europe at 3 or 4 different places. They go across the ocean. They drop them off at about 4 or 5 places on the East Coast, and they pick up cars here that are made and go back to Europe. They go around and around. And they hold a lot of cars. And so that first boat, and these are all recently built boats, so 2022, 21, 22, 23. The second one is a container ship. It's actually the ship in the picture in the upper right. Next one is the Wonder of the Seas cruise ship, which is the bottom right. And I have another container ship there. And you can see the length, the width, and the ratio. And you can see even now, it's 5.5 to 6.5 ratio is about that same ratio in these completely different kinds of boats. Pretty amazing. So it says that this, marine engineering stuff was dialed into the Bible thousands of years ago, and it's the right stuff. Okay. Scientific method. Is the scientific method biblical? The scientific method is an intellectual and practical activity encompassing a systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Like I said, it results in all the technical stuff. Okay, and 1 Thessalonians 5:21 is, test all things, hold fast to what is good. Emphasize the word test all things. And I mentioned the scientific method. I went through this in the last set of classes that I did on it. It's basically a few steps there. You ask a question or create a hypothesis as to what you're trying to prove or disprove and gather data on. You end up performing an experiment. You design the experiment first, but you perform the experiment and gather data, and you analyze the data, and you come to a conclusion based on that. And then you kind of refine. It goes in a loop there. You refine your hypothesis and maybe perform the experiment again if you find the information supported. So it goes through this step, and you keep going and going. I'll emphasize the fact that this doesn't necessarily prove anything. It basically accumulates information that supports or doesn't support a given hypothesis. I'll emphasize it doesn't prove anything, but basically it says test, much like 1 Thessalonians says. Test all things, hold fast to what is good, hold fast to what works, and forget the rest. So, by its very nature, the scientific method is a process of testing and keeping what supports the hypothesis by repeatedly testing. And Without God-given logic, we couldn't comprehend our logical universe and would have no inkling of the scientific method. God gave us the ability to classify and systemize things, ask questions, and devise ways to prove them true or not. And Jesus said, "Consider the lilies to prove God's existence and loving care." So, kind of rolling this up. This is going to be a little bit short today, but He's made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. And kind of to wrap up, it says, does the Bible display adequate scientific foreknowledge to show that it could only have come from God? You know, thoughts?
This leads to things aren't done by chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Science is not just haphazard thrown together.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some type of grand design.
Yeah. And it's written down. It's described. It's described long before we ever came to understand the reality of it. And we use our scientific method to prove these things, and what's in the Bible has shown itself to be true. And these are just a few of the examples sufficient to show that when the Bible states scientific facts, that they're accurate, even when man's knowledge of such things is deficient. How many things can you think of that over the years people did dumb things and lo and behold found out that the Bible was true and is described? And when you start using the things that are described in the Bible, it makes sense and it helps. Can anybody think of any other things that they remember in the Bible like that? What?
The Grand Canyon.
Grand Canyon?
Because when you and I went, we walked through everything and looked at all the displays. But when we went back with the girls, they did a lot more reading of the displays. And there are places in the Grand Canyon where the ground is at an angle, the strata of the soil, and it's not in the right order. And there's seashells in the strata. And that, the people who wrote the display were evolutionists, but I remember Laura looking at me and going, "No, that's not how it happened. God said that when the flood came, the waters came up out of the earth and pushed everything. That's why it's at an angle, and then it covered the whole earth with water. That's why there's seashells in the desert."
And you got to know that the southern rim of the Grand Canyon is at an elevation of 7,000 feet above sea level. It's not a trivial distance to the ocean to where the sea fossils and things could even exist there.
So the flood had to have done that. It could not have happened by, like Tony said, it can't, that stuff doesn't happen by chance.
Yeah.
Nothing where God is concerned is a coincidence.
Did you have a comment? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you look at the history of the writing of the Bible, even the, King James is like from the early 1600s, and that was long before any of this was there. And those writings are in that Bible. So that description of all this stuff is in the book. We know long before. You can say whatever you want to as far as when it might have been updated to reflect this stuff if you want to create a hoax. But the bottom line is this stuff has been in these scriptures for, coming up on 2,000 years? So, how can you argue with this? This is describing how the world works long before we came to understand it. Anybody else have any comments?
How about the circle of the earth?
Yeah. There's a number of other things I could get into about the earth being suspended by nothing. There's some descriptions of that's in there. They talk about the circle of the earth and so forth. And people are standing on the surface. They can't understand. They can't see that big. And we haven't come to understand that until Copernicus and some of those guys.
It's even more, our magnetic makeup of the earth, positive, negative pole that radiates out. If it wasn't for that, the solar winds would blow the atmosphere right off our planet. Just like so many other planets. And it's amazing. Think about the science of it. There's so much more. The moon, we just got done having a solar eclipse. Now think about this. That's at the perfect distance where you can look at the sun, but not see the sun, just see its influence, the corona. And it's mind-boggling to have it in that specific location. None of the other moons of other planets do it like that.
Yeah, there's a study I saw about the eclipse, and there's some people that have studied things, and they discovered things from the corona around the moon when it's in front of the sun that they wouldn't have understood because you can't see them with any of the instrumentation without blocking off the majority of the sun.
And he does these things because our nature is curious. We want to learn, we want to understand. We're looking deep into the stars. We say, oh, well, we're looking all the way into history, 10,000 million years into history. Well, are we? It proves the Big Bang theory over and over again that the Big Bang cannot work.
God
the way
said
they're
it.
saying, because all these solar systems are not all going in the same direction. And my thing, I always talk about somebody, it's okay, the Big Bang isn't the fuse.
Big Bang was God said it,
Yeah.
and banging was
He
done.
said it with his breath. Spoke it.
There's a story of a guy who's talking to God and he says, I can create something just like you created the earth. And God goes, really? He goes, yeah. And God says, okay, show me. So the guy reaches down and picks up a handful of dirt to make a ball, and God goes, you gotta bring your own dirt. Another thing that's really interesting, I'm looking down at the trees that are just leafing out green. When they change color, that's a chemical reaction that has to do with them storing food for the winter. That could have happened anyway if it was true evolution, but like Tony said about God doing this for us, God made it beautiful. So that while those trees are storing food, we are seeing beauty. We could have eaten cardboard and it would have been fine if it had the nutrients in it, but God gave us chocolate and coffee and steak and chocolate
And bacon.
and bacon.
The thing that
Because he knew that he wanted to give us, it's like our kids. We want to give them things that are going to make them happy, that are going to make them grow, that are going to give them joy. We could just give them plain old. But God did it in a way that brings us joy and lets us learn and lets us expand our brains.
if you think of all the beautiful flowers and things you've seen in nature, and you think of the pretty sunsets you've seen, this is one of the other classes I did a while back, is think of how narrow the frequencies of electromagnetics that are in the visible light spectrum. And if you could see all those other frequencies, how much more awesome it would be. I know it would completely overwhelm us if that were the case, though. So I'm kind of glad that we only have that narrow band of colors that we see for in the electromagnetic wave spectrum.
So I got a question for you, and it's gonna kind of make you think about it. But Noah did not have the cycle of water as we know it today.
It never rained before then.
Never rained. Never rained on them. They said it was, some theories that then it's been like a heavy fog. And I've been in places where a heavy fog was thick, but, that would mean that the water temperature had to be just so, all that. It's just, it's an amazing thought process. And, it goes all the way down to erosion to make the mountains that we have today. And all this did happen quickly. It's just,
Shannon, do you have a comment?
Yeah, it's just having conversations like these about the topics tonight. I think I've told Chase this story before, but it always reminds me of back in the youth group at the church I grew up in. Our youth minister gave us a sermon one day, or a class lesson about if we go to school and we talk about God and Jesus and all that. Somebody approaches you and says, I'll only believe it when he shows up in the sky. I only believe it if I can touch it or see it with my own eyes and stuff. And he was like, my best way to combat that argument or give somebody a better argument than coming at somebody that's not believing in God or Jesus, to have an argument of, if you took an animal or if you took a bug off the ground and you grabbed your cell phone, your iPhone or your Android phone, and held it up to the bug's face, and you showed it, you're sitting there and you're letting that insect see a physical object right in front of it, how long will it ever take you to teach that bug how to use it or how to understand that phone? It'll never happen. So if God was to show up in the sky right in front of you, you wouldn't have any idea of what was going on, no more than that bug knows how to operate that phone. And just to grasp his infinite wisdom, he's laid it out as easily and as perfect as a human could understand in these pages.
And I'm going to refer back to a class that I did before called Fingerprints of God. You go through all these things that are just amazing in nature and just phenomenal. And it is ridiculously complex, and it's ridiculously amazing. And you say, what's the probability that this could just happen? And it's, 1 in a gazillion zeros on the end of it. And then you look at this, which is reading the Bible about things that we now know and understand. It's as ridiculous to believe that that just happened and occurred. Okay? And you got to ask yourself, is it more rational to believe that it just happened? Or is it more rational to believe that there is a God? And to me, it's infinitely more probable that there's a God. But to deny that, you're denying spirituality. And people do that. People deny spirituality. They are comfortable saying that, yes, it's possible that this could happen naturally, and I'm going to hang my hat on that. People do that. Okay. Anybody else? Any other comments?
I just wanted to say, we've been studying on seed, S-E-E-D. And the seed is, we've been studying this, this is wild, but anyway, some genetics, man, we've been studying in class. And he is saying, but he is saying that the woman has a seed. She has ability, but it
going to see the awesomeness of God over the next couple of weeks when somewhere on the order of 1 trillion cicadas come out of the ground. And they haven't come out for years and years and years and years. There's one brood of them that's 17-year cycle, another brood that's a 13-year cycle, and they're both coming out this year. It's the first time in like 230 years that they both hit the same year. But they're going to be around here because this is part of the region that it's kind of the whole southeast of the United States. More toward Tennessee than here, but I have no doubt we're going to see them. But there's going to be trillions of them, so get ready. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your attendance and comments along the way.